Hi, welcome to the July 1st meeting of the Kubernetes VMware User Group. The agenda today will be on load balancers for running Kubernetes on top of VMware infrastructure, presumably in an on-prem scenario. We had originally hoped to recruit Dan Finnerman to speak today to do kind of a deep dive on load balancers and probably KubeVip in particular, but he was unable to attend. We're going to try to queue that up for a future, but we're still going to stick with the load balancer topic just because some users suggested an interest at the end of the last meeting. And this should, if we can get an intro down now, it should be a good segue to maybe get some real deep dive coverage in the next meeting or whatever meeting we manage to recruit Dan for. So with that said, I've got a quick intro deck just in case there's anybody here who doesn't know or needs a refresher on load balancers. I'll try to whip through it quickly. Then I have an idea that I'd like to do an audience poll on what load balancers people have actually are using or have tried using in the past, just to kind of focus discussion so that people are aware of what expertise people might be bringing to the table here. So let me start by sharing my screen. And let me, I think you can probably see the meeting notes, but let me open the deck. If you can't see that, somebody speak up now, please.
Looks good.
Okay, so load balancers for Kubernetes on-prem. And I did think we had covered this for a while, but I actually found this deck from last year, so I've updated it a little bit. We'll start with what is a load balancer. Well, it's a tool that you would commonly use for making the Kubernetes control plane high availability. Now, if you have a single app that could tolerate downtime, maybe just a single node is enough, and you don't really actually need this high availability in all scenarios. A scenario might either be that this is some test or learning infrastructure that's kind of a throwaway, but it could even be something running an app or a service where a single node is good enough just because you can tolerate some downtime and maybe have technology in place to quickly rebuild a Kubernetes cluster from scratch if something bad happens. But if you need high availability, well, you need a load balancer. You typically need more than just a load balancer. You also need a high availability data store that holds the state of your Kubernetes cluster. And that would generally be something like an etcd cluster with an odd number of nodes greater than one. Now, you typically have at least 3 nodes then for etcd. And common practice is to co-locate your control plane components with that data store. But technically, 2 control plane nodes is enough. You probably don't need the 3, but if you're going to co-locate them, I think common practice is that you go with 3 etcd nodes and 3 control plane nodes. Use the load balancer in front of those control plane nodes. Now, if this isn't apparent, in order to achieve high availability, you not only need those control plane nodes, but the load balancer itself has to have inherent high availability. I mean, if the load balancer is a single point of failure, what did you gain by going to multiple control plane nodes and still sticking with a failure-prone load balancer? So a few possible solutions to get HA on that load balancer are using something like keep alive D with HA proxy. Now, I'm not going to cover Keep Alive D in detail here because I went and looked it up, and that is a copyleft GPL license. And I know that for a lot of places, that's not considered a suitable scenario. There's also a second solution called KubeVip, and it works by putting a well-known IP address on a node, one of the control plane nodes, and then moving it to another host if the original fails. Under the covers, these sorts of solutions utilize ARP or BGP, and they do have limitations if you can't utilize multiple IPs on a host. Often the case if you're in a public cloud environment. And if you're in a public cloud environment, more than likely you're going to use that cloud's load balancer anyway. So what we're talking about today is probably valid for running Kubernetes on vSphere infrastructure. Maybe parts of this would be relevant running in a public cloud, but I'm guessing that you're going to go in a different direction in many cases if you're on such a public cloud. So just this slide shows that not only can you use it potentially to load balance the Kubernetes control plane itself, but in many cases, you could also use that to expose an app or service to the outside world and load balance that app, that exposed app or service. If you're going to expose an app or a service, there's a couple scenarios. We're talking probably exposing it to the outside. The load balancer is like a general purpose solution that occupies potentially multiple levels in the network stack. But if you're talking about HTTP, HTTPS, there is an option to use an ingress controller to accomplish exposing that too. So there is also the issue of, so ingress would typically be up at L7, load balancing down at L4. There are potentially some hybrid solutions that can operate concurrently at both, and that's kind of a deeper dive topic. There's also the issue of load balancing to the outside world, outside your Kubernetes cluster, then load balancing within the Kubernetes cluster. Within the Kubernetes cluster, Kubernetes has its own built-in solutions for that. So you wouldn't have to deploy something like KubeVip HA proxy to load balance the things consumed entirely within your Kubernetes cluster. Load balancers vary by features. Some of them may have all of these, some of them just a few. I'll let you read the list. I'm not going to read the slide to you. And here are some available load balancers for use on-prem. First of all, in the hardware category, load balancers aren't new. I think they've been available since the 1990s. And you're likely to have needs to load balance even legacy things that are running on VMs or potentially bare metal. So in many organizations, if it's a big data center, things like an F5 are in common usage, and they can be and often are integrated with Kubernetes. If you're on a cloud rather than on-prem, you typically use whatever that cloud provider's built-in solution is. When you get to a modern containerized solution and don't have something like an F5, there are software solutions in no particular order. I've listed them here. I'll publish a link to this deck afterward in the agenda notes doc. And the ones that you see in the green font are links to the repos for these different projects. Not that there aren't links to HA proxy and Nginx, but I was whipping this slide deck together just this morning and didn't have quite time to finish this. And then there are some commercial ones, Citrix NetScaler, and then some with VMware infrastructure. It's not uncommon for VMware customers to utilize some of these paid non-open source solutions like NSX and the AVi load balancer. By the rules of the Kubernetes project that sponsors this user group, we can't turn this into a sales pitch. So I'm going to have a pretty light touch. I'm going to mention that these VMware things exist, but not go into any details or promotion on these. So what I'd like to do here as a next step is to have an audience poll of what load balancers that you've actually tried. And let me see if I can get to this poll to post it in chat. Could somebody else post it in? Well, let me see. It's taking up my whole screen, so I'm going to stop.
I can get it, Steve. It's okay.
Anyway, this is the end of the deck, so I'm going to end the slideshow anyway, I guess.
There it is. Oh, it appears I pasted in the admin link, not the poll itself.
Maybe I made a mistake in that slide deck and put the admin link there. I don't know.
Could have been.
Do you have it, or should I?
Yeah, it's on the one on the Slack channel worked. I'm just going to copy that now.
Okay. The admin link might be convenient so we can show results afterward.
There we go.
I'm going to abstain from voting.
I know. I agree with Keith here. They're radio buttons, not checkboxes. I chose one and then I put the rest into the comment section.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't test the poll either. Anyway, we've got a small group here, so if there's a flaw in how that polling was done, I think we can just discuss it in audio. I'm going to post the link in the chat for the results. So looks like unless somebody is still in the process of voting, it's all KubeVip so far. HA proxy. It's interesting because I think we had a meeting talking about load balancers about a year ago, and MetalLB kind of won the popularity contest back then. Now, obviously, this group is not representative of the whole world either. Potentially, it's kind of a selective polling, but it's still interesting. You know, if I did vote in this poll, for example, my own use I'd characterize as almost home lab like, right? I mean, at most I might be publishing one of my own blogs, but you know, I can't claim that I'm running production Kubernetes. But nonetheless, it's interesting that I think KubeVip is relatively new, yet it seems to be getting an awful lot of traction. And I have to say, I've found it pretty easy to use. And I'm a former MetalLB user. Now, we've got some users here. Maybe, does anybody just want to open their mic and make comments on what your experience is, like why you chose KubeVip, your thoughts on it, and compare to what your experience was comparing it to other potential solutions?
Or if you don't use KubeVip and you have reasons why you use something else, that's also cool.
Yeah, I mean, I use KubeVip mostly when it comes to home labbing and also for production things. A lot of times when not using commercial offerings, it just is by far the most customizable in terms of the type of networking settings you can configure, whether it be UPnP or other more advanced technologies. It's really easy to set up. And also I used to use MetalLB, but MetalLB's community is
Not great.
struggling, to say the least. There are issue tickets open since 2014 there, basically. And KubeVip is much more active currently. So that's why I'm using it. It has supported the newer versions as of a day later in Kubernetes, and MetalLB took a month and a half to support 121. It's just more maintained, which is why I'm using it mostly. It's also
Anybody
nice
else?
to have the same solution for a control plane and for service type load balancer, which you can use it for both. So that's nice.
Yeah, I was going to ask if anybody had experience using it with like Istio service mesh, because I did use MetalLB for that a long time ago and found it to be somewhat difficult to set up, but I did eventually get it to work, and haven't gone back to try to do that with KubeVip.
I've done it and it works pretty much out of the box.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice. KubeVip is really good for home lab stuff, and it runs on ARM as well, as does MetalLB, which is the first one that I was really exposed to, because I run a Raspberry Pi cluster at home. So MetalLB primarily, and then moved on to KubeVip once they added UPnP support, because and the ability to pull addresses from DHCP instead of having to have a static block that you give to it. It'll just take an address from DHCP, hold the reservation, and then allocate that to a service, which is really slick for home lab stuff.
Has anybody here used KubeVip with the VMware desktop hypervisors, Fusion or Workstation? I'm just curious as to any anecdotal proof that that is trouble-free and just works. I can attest that I have used MetalLB there, and it does work.
I haven't used it there, but I've used it in Kind, and I've used it in ESXi on ARM. So I'd say that if it works on a VM running on ESXi on a Raspberry Pi and runs in Kind, the Kind networking is pretty similar to when you're using Fusion and things like that. So I don't think there should be any issues, but I haven't actually tested that.
Yeah, like Keith says, AVi does have a nice GUI. If you are looking for something that's like commercially supported as well, then that is a nice way to go too. I answered HA proxy in mine because most of my stuff just runs on TKG service these days, which is fronted by HA proxy. So I don't think about what LB I'm using, because that kind of takes care of it for me. But
Yeah.
if I were to spin up one myself, it would probably be KubeVip, or if I have more advanced uses, then maybe AVi.
Yeah, I think that most of the commercial Kubernetes distributions in their installer at least give you an option of spinning something up for you in the software-based load balancer category. But I think it's also true that most of them let you override that if you choose to. Does anybody else have any questions or things they want to bring up with regard to load balancers? We've still got like 30 minutes or more left here, and I didn't come here with a lot of prepared places to go. If we have time, I think maybe we'll try a poll like we did with load balancers regarding Ingress, just because I'm curious.
Hi there. I had a question about people who are doing this for production workloads. If anyone has experience pursuing support for like the AVi product, because right now we're using MetalLB with TKG multi-cloud, and that's been working great. But we've looked at some of the things we get with that TKG multi-cloud as it becomes Tanzu standard, would be like something like AVi would be potentially included. Just wondering if people have tried the support on that or not. KubeVip for that level has been scary since, well, you don't get it with TKGM. There's no support docs from VMware on it. So, and it's been broken in a number of the TKG releases. You have issues where it doesn't properly ARP for new IPs and stuff. So been a hesitant on that, but I'm glad to hear that it's working well for others. So we might check that out more too.
Yeah, so I use TKGM on a daily basis, and I use AVi there, which is quite amazing, especially with the abilities of GSLB and things like that, multi-cluster load balancing and all of that. But KubeVip I also use, and I use it on TKGM in other stances, and it works great as well. So yeah, and KubeVip is used in any TKGM no matter what also, just because it's used for the control plane load balancer, just not necessarily for service type load balancer. But both of them I've had working in TKGM very well. And AVi just comes with additional capabilities that are pretty nice from a commercial offering standpoint.
I think AVi can do, if not now, it's something that certainly they've talked about doing is layer 7 load balancing on Ingress as well. So rather than just being dumb layer 4 LB, you can do layer 7 LB with it as well.
It does that. It does Ingress, not in Tanzu standard. In Tanzu Advanced, it does. That's just a licensing thing for commercial, but it works. And yeah, it's got layer 7 load balancing, layer 4 load balancing, global service load balancing, and it comes with like, it automatically does DNS. So it kind of makes external DNS not necessary in a lot of cases, because it just creates DNS records for you automatically. It has a built-in DNS service that you can set up. So it's pretty nice.
And you've just answered a question our local VMware reps couldn't, which is what are the AVi feature differences between Tanzu Standard and Advanced? So thank you very much, Scott.
Yeah, there's more, and this isn't a commercial offering here, but feel free to reach out to me also on Slack and whatnot. I don't want to cross the boundaries here of what's allowed or not in terms of commercial offerings, but more than welcome to reach out to me on the Kubernetes or VMware Slack, and more than happy to explain those differences after I spent about a month trying to figure it out myself.
And maybe some of us VMware people will take back the notification that we could perhaps use a little bit of training with the people customers are encountering. So Keith, I see in the chat, I don't know if you're free to go on the microphone, but you appear to have had some experience on these and made a comment about them.
He's putting the kids to bed.
Yeah, it could be. A lot of times people join this with the cell phone and they're kind of limited on participation. Anybody else got questions on load balancing, or even it sounds like there's commonly a need to combine L7 and L4 functionality, and kind of whether people have used any of these software-based solutions in a combo scenario, because I think at least a few of them claim to have the potential to be usable at multiple levels, but I can't say that I've tried that myself. So how about if we move on then to a poll of what people have experience with as Ingress solutions? I didn't have time to put together one of those poll junkie polls. So maybe we can just try to do this in either responding by chat or audibly in terms of what Ingress solutions you've tried and liked, or tried and not liked.
I can kick off if no one else is going to. The number one that I usually use is actually Trafic. I used Trafic 1.7 for ages on the home lab stuff, because it had built-in Acme support. So as you added stuff that was service type load balancer, or used an Ingress, like a root, it would automatically generate a cert for that, which is publicly signed, and then assign it to the service for you. That was the main reason I used it. And then I got very annoyed because they did a v2.0 and completely changed the structure of how you request those middlewares and all this kind of stuff, and basically just broke absolutely everything. I would have had to go through a lot of learning. So I gave up on that and just went with KubeVip and Ingress Nginx.
So what was it like when it worked well? You just handed it some Let's Encrypt suitable credentials and it just did everything automatically?
Yeah, all because it was external DNS integrated, it automatically added the DNS records for me. And then it would ask Let's Encrypt for the certificates, which it used Cloudflare to authenticate that I owned the domain. So my domain is hosted on Cloudflare. So it used my Cloudflare API key to put something into DNS to say, hey, this is a legit request. It signed it and then sent me back the request. So it could be done completely offline. I didn't actually have to open any ports inwards for it to do the certificate authentication or domain authentication. So it worked really well. And it's still sitting there on 1.7, just because I haven't been bothered to upgrade it to 2.0 and it kind of just works at the moment. But yeah, it's becoming more and more flaky as time goes on. But it's hard to find something that does all that stuff together, especially if you're new and trying to piece together, okay, I need a load balancer and I need an ingress and then I need to run cert manager and then understanding how all those things run together. To me, you know, at least the early version of Trafic did all that in one package, which is what attracted me to it.
Do you have any idea as to why that support dropped out? Is this something like Metal LB where maybe it's an open source project and has stopped getting attention by contributors, or is it something else?
No, it's got a huge amount of attention, but they've got a commercial offering as well, and they're nerfing the upstream offering. And
okay.
Yeah, that's why.
I noticed in chat that in terms of Ingress Solutions, Keith said he's putting the kids to bed, but he's used Contour, and I know I've used Contour myself.
Yeah, I've used Contour a lot, and for the Acme, I just use Cert Manager, which integrates via annotation with Contour, both ingresses and HTTP proxies. But in my clusters, I have both Nginx and Contour because each one can do things that the other ones can't. So I use both of them, and that's the nice thing versus load balancer providers where you can only have one in a cluster. You can have multiple ingress controllers in a cluster. So that's at least the nice part here is that I've used in the same cluster, I've had 3 or 4 ingress controllers also in the past. So it's nice, but Contour is kind of the standard that I've been going to recently. Just because of how easy it is. And in terms of multi-team security, it offers some things that other ones don't have the capabilities in that regard.
Yeah, I'm not claiming to be an ingress expert. I'm far from it, but I've heard there are potential differences there, even in supporting different namespaces and things to get multi-tenancy, if you will, where you've got different teams sharing a Kubernetes cluster, trying to interoperate and not run into conflicts related to ingress. Does anybody have experience dealing with those kinds of issues?
By the way, I just sent in the chat also, there's a great Google Doc that's constantly updated with a table of all the ingress controllers and features in between all the different ingress controllers out there that gets updated basically on a weekly basis.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's a very good resource.
Does anyone have any strong feelings one way or another around ingresses that use Nginx as their data plane versus ingresses that use Envoy as their data plane? Because there seems to be like a bit of a division between those two flavors. Or maybe it's just me and I'm imagining that there's a division.
Well, I think they are quite different. I know in my early days, I tried some of each, and the first one I felt I got working fully was Envoy based Contour, so I just stuck with it. But I can't say that it was sort of dabbling rather than doing detailed research. I
overall am an Envoy fan just because I'm also an Istio fan, and just Envoy the whole way. I like using the same technology. And when service meshes and all of that are coming in, I think that it's nice to have a leveled playground where there's, the same tooling being used across the different networking stack, just kind of makes things easier to debug. You only need to learn one type of tool that you need to debug, really, which is why I use it. But I haven't found any like performance differences or anything in that case, just more because other tooling is using it. I've found that easier to implement.
Yeah, one issue I had, I'm recollecting now what it was like when I first got into this a couple of years ago. And one of the issues I had with Nginx comes about just because there are multiple things built using Nginx, an Nginx foundation, so that when you Google search for things, there are paid versions, open source versions, and then even within the open source, I think it got forked once or twice, and you'll find a blog post or something purporting to describe how to use it, go down the path and discover that they're talking about a different one from what you're trying to use. And that was just, might be more of a me thing, but it was kind of a mess as a user trying to get the thing to work.
Yeah, the hardest part I think with Ingress is that everyone has annotations, especially Nginx are known for this, and AWS for having ingresses that all of the advanced capabilities, you have to write JSON files and add them into annotations into the ingress. So JetStack actually, who also created Cert Manager, have an open source tool that I just sent the link to, a website where you can actually build an ingress through a GUI and it creates the YAML file for you, including like things like Cert Manager integrations, external DNS integrations. It's very nice if you're using Nginx, because trying to know how to build those JSONs out for advanced use cases is a doctorate to understand how to do it.
Yeah, I'd seen some stuff to do with Ingress v2, or is it like Service v2 APIs?
Service v2.
Right.
Yeah.
It's supposed to address a lot of this annotation sprawl that we have.
Which is, it's definitely a huge improvement. Although what I can say is that TGIK, and those who don't know TGIK, amazing podcast every week, basically, was the only product that even borked the people on TGIK that they couldn't figure out exactly how to grok it. It's not there yet 100%, but it definitely gets rid of annotations, just makes it very difficult to understand how you actually create a basic example as well.
I think it's like V1 Alpha 1 at the minute, right? It's not actually V2 stable,
it's an
right?
alpha It's an alpha feature, and they're making changes. I think it's V1 Alpha 2 now, or it is going to be in 122. And they're changing it around a lot right now because they've gotten some interesting feedback if you follow the GitHub on it.
It might be kind of a cold statement on the condition of the world. The fact that you need a tool to use a tool might indicate things are a little bit more complex than they need to be. Scott, what's your take on even using just Istio service mesh instead? Does that help you avoid some of going down the rat hole of configuring these annotations and things for directly using an ingress, or are they just two different categories that don't intersect?
It can. I mean, there is Istio Gateway, which can do layer 7 load balancing and can be an ingress controller. I happen to like kind of a divide and conquer approach, where I think that Istio is very good at what it does best, which is service mesh. And I think that there are other products that do ingress better than they do in terms of from external services. So I don't use, Istio for that, although I have seen it used by people who are very happy with it. I happen to like separating the two out, although it can do everything. It's just a less capable ingress controller than others are in many cases, or in other cases, it's just more complex to use than other ingress controllers, because it uses a CRD for its management like Contour does, but its CRD is much more cumbersome than an HTTP proxy CRD is.
So if we manage to get Dan Finnerman on a future meeting here to do a deep dive, do people have ideas for questions they'd like to ask? What I'm thinking is that if we approach him and we can give him a list of questions or topics in advance, it would help him give us a more focused presentation on what people are interested in. Whether it be how you'd go about using it, or a wish list for feature enhancements. I don't know if somebody's got ideas. Let's discuss them. Okay, I guess I'll take that silence as people need time to think about it. But if you do come up with something, maybe you can drop it in our Slack channel, because Miles and I are, like I say, hoping to recruit him at a future meeting. Here's another topic I want to put on the table for the group. Miles and I have an opportunity to put a user group session on during the KubeCon North America event that's happening in October, and our due date for getting this submitted is next week. But if any group members have something they'd like to give Miles and I a homework assignment on to cover at the KubeCon event, and whether you can go to KubeCon or not, the CNCF always publishes these eventually out on YouTube, so you'd still be able to catch it.
It's also, I think KubeCon North America is going to be both virtual and in person. They're going to be like live streaming it online. They said it's going to be a dual conference, virtual and in person.
Yes, that's true. I'm on the program committee, and if you watch it live streamed, it's, the registration is comparable to what it has been for the COVID conferences over the last year, so relatively inexpensive. And for physical attendance, it's back to that old world. Preliminary indications seem to be that a fair number of people are intending to attend physically too. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Miles, one of the things we might be able to cover there would be, just when you opened the meeting, you were lamenting some of the state of the world with Kubeflow, and maybe covering that, maybe a little broader than just machine learning, but bringing in Bitfusion and how to share GPUs when running Kubernetes on vSphere infrastructure would be an interesting topic. Just to confirm that, do any of the members here in the meeting want to give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down on whether you think that would be a useful or interesting topic to cover?
I'm always happy to talk about Bitfusion. I'm just, wary about the commercial offering thing that we've got going on with, so because it is a commercial product, or it's part of vSphere. Technically, you have to pay for it. So I don't know where that falls.
Well, I think if vSphere inherently, this is about running on vSphere. So
that's true.
That is okay. What we can't do is pitch it, meaning giving, ordering information, prices, that kind of thing. But if it's about using, so long as you can use pure upstream Kubernetes, like either anybody else's commercial distro, or just get the pure open source Kubernetes and layer it on top of vSphere, that's fine for coverage under the rules.
I'm always happy to do ML stuff if people are interested in ML stuff. If not, that's also fine as well. I know that's a very a niche subject that only applies to a limited subset of our users.
I know I find it very interesting, and especially on vSphere 7 with assignable hardware and Bitfusion, it becomes much easier to utilize within upstream Kubernetes. So I'm always a plus on that, but I know it is a niche subject that not many people necessarily are dealing with, although it is one of the harder points on vSphere. So it is something that makes sense in the VMware user group. It's one of the things that is much easier in public clouds a lot of times with cluster autoscalers that can just add GPUs very easily, something that's less easy in an on-prem environment where you're constrained by how many GPUs you actually own. So I think that could be very interesting.
Yeah, we could do something like that, Steve. You know, the best way to get value out of your GPU hardware on vSphere and Kubernetes or something like that. And we can discuss the different options that there are on vSphere for doing GPUs and machine learning, whether Bitfusion or assignable hardware, like Scott was saying, or any number of ways.
Yeah, and it is somewhat niche, but it's growing. I mean, certainly maybe the reason it's niche is that it's been hard and expensive to do. So that
and the documentation is atrocious usually.
Yeah.
You said usually, are there any cases where it isn't?
No, it's always.
Okay. I was just making sure I didn't miss something good.
No, it's always really, really hard to get your head around.
Well, I think I've been going to KubeCons for 3 years now, and I caught some of the earliest Cube flows where the talk emphasized how easy it was, but then afterward I'd hear countless war stories of people who said, I saw that thing on how easy it was, but then I tried to do it at home and it wasn't easy at all.
It's kind of the way it always goes, isn't it? The art of the 5-minute demo.
But I think maybe if we do that, we should try to come up with even some use case that we can use to emphasize it, and maybe something that people could do at home.
Well, I've actually got one, so that's the reason I've been working on this for the last I'd say 3 weeks to a month now. Is we have an actual use case, which is you have say a car park at an airport, right? And you have a camera pointed at the gate, and when cars roll up, if they've already prepaid for parking, it recognizes the number plate and it opens the barrier on the way out. Likewise, it says, okay, this is that car, they owe this much money, put in your credit card, take the payment. So basically, we built a model that does the license plate inferencing, and then we've packaged that up. It runs on top of cloud native runtimes or Knative, basically. And then it takes those snapshot, does inferencing, sends the data back, that kind of thing. So we do have a real use case, and we're trying to integrate actual cameras and stuff into it as well. So maybe that would be an interesting one because it's something tangible, at least.
Yeah, I'm geeky enough that maybe even sounds cool enough for me to do at home if I don't need tens of thousands of dollars worth of hardware.
Right. I'm trying to hook my doorbell up to it now to see if it can recognize the postman or not.
I heard a cool idea on YouTube, by the way, of that recognition. And with regard to that recognition, the car park idea is great. But I know that a lot of the fast food service companies that support ordering by apps are tremendously interested in recognizing vehicles, either by license plate or even more crudely, just by what the vehicle looks like, because they can potentially narrow it down quite a bit. They know who put in an order for a sandwich. And if they've learned once what that car looks like, that it's a red SUV of a particular brand, they really only have to guess between a few potential candidates to spot that, hey, this car that just pulled in the pickup line is very likely to correspond with this order that we have ready to go. Maybe an employee could carry out the bag of food to the person and not have them tie up a space in the line. And, I think that use case might be pretty cool.
No, that sounds interesting for sure. It's a bit of a rabbit hole once you get into it, though. Like all this stuff, you're like, how hard could it be? And then you start reading documentation, you realize very quickly how hard it could be, except there's, like 5 layers of how hard could it be whenever you run it on top of Knative on Kubernetes and there's all these dependencies.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm actually working on a pet project on this also, but actually around building ML around vSphere events that's actually using Knative and the VMware Event Broker appliance as a way to ingest the data of all the events from vSphere, which can then trigger through Knative functions that do ML on all of that to try and detect anomalies within a vSphere environment as well.
So that would be the appliance that we had William Lamb and Michael Gash present on a few months ago, right?
1 month ago, it was the last session. Yeah, exactly. Which is now using Knative, and that comes with a bunch of capabilities that make this a bit easier because it's using now the new cloud events, which are easier to ingest into machine learning systems, I would say.
Yeah, the only challenge I've had with the cloud event stuff in my particular use case is because it's image data, a cloud event. So I learned from some of the engineers working on Knative today is that cloud events theoretically have a size limitation of 64K. And, I'm sending images that are upwards of a meg at this thing and wondering why sometimes it doesn't quite work the way it should. And they're like, well, that's because the theoretical limitation is almost, it's more than an order of magnitude below what you're trying to do. So there are certainly places where it fits and places maybe where there are better approaches.
I suppose if you manage to stage the image in some other repo and just use the event to transport the link, that might be workable.
Right. So what we've actually been doing is the images are in S3 and we're using trigger meshes, S3, AWS S3 trigger source for Knative eventing. So anytime something gets uploaded to an S3 bucket, it sends an event with the link. So that's exactly what we're doing. It gets the link, it downloads the link, but then it has to base 64 encode it and send it to the inference server. And that in and of itself is an event, which is again, just a meg in size. So, there's only, you can at least do one part of it, decouple that, but there are a couple of dependencies and stuff that we haven't quite worked out, which is why otherwise I would have demoed it today. It's just not working fully yet.
I'm wondering, I'm trying to learn the whole cloud events thing myself, but with regard to using the vSphere event integration into machine learning, it might eventually get into something related to that same size limitation. I can see that if you can use the machine learning to give you early warning on problems, and that would certainly be valuable. But then you might want to take it to root cause analysis where you'd want potentially log files and things that could also be very large and open-ended, so that if you were to use that pattern of providing a link to a bigger source as something that could be consumed upstream, that could be just a generically useful pattern if that's workable.
Yeah, and it definitely is workable because you can also just ingest into a similar, or I know it would be a different model, but you could ingest into it, for example, from a syslog that collects all of your logs from vCenter. And then because of timestamps between events and the logs, you could also correlate accordingly to understand, anomalies between the event and the logs that it's triggering. If there's any anomaly there that even though the event came off, it actually was a bit different because the events, aren't necessarily always 100% the exact same thing happened. The end goal is, but maybe it had a jitter in the middle and it had to do a retry and there's a built-in retry. You could get that through the logs, but not through the event. And then that could possibly be something that you would learn through ML, that like there's a precondition to a failure that's about to occur when all of a sudden the logs have to do 2 retries, then 3 retries. You know that in 10 minutes your environment's going to go down or whatever it is, things like that. You definitely could by doing a cross correlation between 2 data sources. But that's not so simple model, I would say, to build, but definitely is within the realms of possibility.
There's a lot of manual labeling of data.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Okay, well, we're 7 minutes from the closing time for this meeting. Does anybody have any last minute discussion topics or things they want to bring up to carry over into the next meeting? If not, maybe we'll close this a little bit early. Okay, I'll take that silence as nothing to add to the agenda, and I'll thank everybody for coming, and Miles and I are going to get a proposal out for KubeCon. We'll let you know what we came up with at the next meeting, and we're going to try to recruit Dan to talk about KubeVip, and can't promise that recruiting effort will be successful, but we're going to try. So once again, thanks everybody for joining and contributing to this. I'll go and patch up some of the links that came through in the chat here and append it to the meeting agenda notes document, as well as a link to that deck that I presented. So bye.